Boston to New York shoreline was the backbone of the New Haven Railroad. In 1969, the bankrupt road was absorbed into the Penn Central, itself the product of a 1968 merger of the Pennsylvania and the New York Central. For the next few years, trains on the shoreline were a mixture of New Haven Orange, Pennsylvania Red, and Penn Central Black. I took the following movie to the 4-track electrified section in the summer of 1969, mostly in and around Westport, Connecticut. The bulk of the traffic in this area was ex-New Haven MUs, like this quartet of washboard cars. By 1969, the only New Haven passenger electric locomotives still operating were the EP5 jets. This jet is headed east, about to pass under the access road to Sherwood Island State Park. The jet's complex New Haven paint scheme got replaced with monolithic Penn Central Black. Here's an example coming into the station at Westport. Of the 10 jets originally built in 1954, only 6 were operating at the time of the merger. Always prone to overheating, they were pulled from service in 1973 after one of them caught fire in the tunnel under Park Avenue. What replaced the electrics on the New Haven's passenger trains were the FL9 diesels. Based on EMD's FP9s, the design was modified for third rail operation into Grand Central. As a result, they ended up with a unique and instantly recognizable wheel arrangement: a 2-axle front truck, a 3-axle one in the rear. The long-lived FL9s continued to work on various commuter lines into Grand Central for another 40 years. Richard Bissell was a regular commuter on the New Haven and wrote about it. "There is so much smoke in the cars by now that the bridge players can't see their hands very well and begin to overbid." While there were electric freight engines on the shoreline, freight trains were frequently headed up by diesel power. A mixture of ALCO and EMD power handles this freight with a string of TOFC loads up front. There are no fewer than 10 movable bridges on the shoreline. This one at Westport here is actually a pair of 2-track bridges side by side. And the catenary lifts and closes with the bridge, unlike the bridge at Coscob, which has a gap in the wires over the movable part of the span. The 10 movable bridges on the shoreline are Coscob, Norwalk, Westport, Bridgeport, Stratford, Old Saybrook, Niantic, Shaw's Cove, New London, and Mystic. Almost immediately after the New Haven became part of the Penn Central, ex-Pennsylvania GG1 electrics began running through New York to New Haven. The newest thing on rails in 1969 was the United Aircraft Turbo Train. A tilt train with gas turbine power, it ran between New York and Boston in 4 hours 40 minutes. And here it is in its original 3-car configuration on the afternoon run to Boston. And on the morning run from Boston to New York. Now we're on an afternoon train behind a GG1 out of Penn Station, New York, on our way to New Haven. This is a pair of FL9s westbound at Stamford. Crossing the bridge at Norwalk. And coming into New Haven, where there will be an engine change. And here's what we'll be getting. A pair of ex-Pennsylvania EMD E8s, one still in PRR livery. The two-track main east of New Haven was not electrified until 2000. And the rest of what you'll see was shot in Stonington, Mystic, or New London, Connecticut. This is the station at New London, a pair of E-units and mostly ex-New Haven cars. This is a foggy morning on Wamphossock Point in Stonington. This is the big curve in Stonington, the tightest curve on the entire shoreline. I believe it was posted at the time for 45 miles an hour. It's where the line swings inland from the shore and heads northeast for Providence and Boston. This pair of FL9s are Boston bound. Always remember the day I took this shot, June 21st, 1970, the day the Penn Central declared bankruptcy. Another pair of ex-Pennsylvania E8s, this time the lead unit still in its original Tuscan red. At the time, many of the trains were like this one, just one locomotive and two coaches. This is the swing bridge across the Mystic River at Mystic, Connecticut. This is the same bridge, this time from trackside. This is the bridge across the Thames at New London. In 2008, the center span was converted to a vertical lift bridge. Long shot of the causeway in Noank, Connecticut. Unusual mix of motive power here. An E unit in the lead with a freight unit behind. Here's an eastbound freight on a summer day in Stonington. And here a westbound turbo train leans into the big curve in Stonington. You can clearly see the single shared axle between the cars. The slowest train on the shoreline was undoubtedly the Providence New London Local, which took 85 minutes to go 62 miles, stopping at every station along the way. But for commuting to Providence or for catching a train to New York without driving to New London, it could not be beat. And here it comes into Stonington in the late afternoon. The train was always the same, a pair of Budd rail diesel cars, but the lead unit was no ordinary RDC. It had originally been custom built for the Roger Williams, one of a number of failed New Haven passenger train experiments of the 1950s. Late in the evening, a pair of FL9s, still in their New Haven livery, passed through Stonington Borough. This is the early morning train to Boston, coming across the causeway into Stonington. Now it is New Year's 1971. A pair of E8s lead a mix of ex-Pennsylvania and ex-New Haven cars through a snowstorm. Out on the big curve again. To the left, you can see some of Stonington resident Jim Bradley's collection of buses and Pullman cars. After Mr. Bradley died in 1988, the Pullmans went to the Railroad Museum of New England and the Valley Railroad. I don't know what became of the buses. Later in 1971, Amtrak would take over financial responsibility for the nation's passenger trains. But the Penn Central would continue to operate the old equipment, and passengers would continue to complain about the lack of heat, or light, or air conditioning. It would be almost 5 years before the first of the new Amfleet equipment began operating on the Northeast Corridor, and the old equipment was repurposed, relocated, or retired.